All right, everyone, welcome to using paragraphs. This is a session now that Les and I have given a couple times.
This will be 3.
This is number 3, yeah. But we still make a lot of mistakes, so feedback is always welcome. We always appreciate that. We're actually trying something new today. Google Slides recently came up with this new feature where we can solicit questions, and you guys can ask questions and vote on questions. So, and then at the end we can see those and kind of promote them to the screen and talk about them. So it's actually that URL at the top, the Google/Slides/whatever up there. So you can go to that in your computer or your phone or whatever, ask a question, and then we'll be able to see that, and we can talk about it at the end. You can also feel free to just raise your hand, and we'll take questions throughout the presentation too. For those of you who are in the future, and this is being recorded, obviously you cannot go to that URL and ask a question because we won't be watching that, but you will get to see the slides that have the promoted questions on them.
Yeah, and I hope you enjoy the future, wherever you are. I hope you have fun cars.
Whenever you are.
Whenever you are.
Yeah.
Yes. So.
Yeah, so my name is David Needham. I've been working with Drupal for many, many years. I have always appreciated the sort of the beginner, the person who's first starting out in Drupal. I first learned Drupal because someone invested a lot of time in mentoring me and helping to answer questions that I've had. So because of that, I feel this great desire to kind of give back, and I try to talk about beginner topics whenever possible. If you don't have a mentor, I really feel like that's an essential part of getting the most out of being in the Drupal community. So this is a great opportunity to find a mentor. If you don't have one, if you have questions, Les and I will be up here at the front. Feel free to grab us. We'll be here for the rest of the camp too, so let us know. I work for Enjoy Creativity. It's a small nonprofit that helps churches think creatively about communications. We typically do things like build Drupal websites for them, but we also do online giving and live streaming and social media, things like that.
Yeah. And I'm Les Lim. I work with 10.7 here in Minneapolis. It's a small web development shop that primarily, almost exclusively actually, works in Drupal. But I echo everything that David said. I got into the Drupal community here in Minneapolis probably 10 years ago when just attending the user groups, and I knew very little about programming, and I knew nothing about Drupal, and I found just being with other people and working out their problems with them as well as my problems was one of the most eye-opening experiences that I ever had. Not even just getting answers to my questions, but hearing other questions. If it's an opportunity that you have to go to a user group or to meet people here at camp with you, you should take advantage of that opportunity as best you can. With that,
yeah. So I think the best way to describe how to use paragraphs, the paragraphs module, is to come at it with a scenario. So let's say you're a site builder, and your end user, the editor of your website or the person adding the content, would like to do something like this. They have an article, for example, or a basic page. They want to add 2 columns. They want to have a graphic, sort of a heading text, and a kind of this text area below it. What are some solutions for letting them do this? Well, there's quite a few. Certainly in the body field, you can just write the code. You can write HTML and get an output that looks just like that. But let's say your editor, your content creator doesn't actually know code. They don't really have a desire to get geeky with the H2s and all of those things. What are some other options? Yeah.
So the main reason why we don't do this, besides the fact that this is virtually unreadable, is this is what's colloquially known now as a blob. And you might ask what a blob is. A blob is a movie from the 1950s, as it turns out. Who's familiar with the blob? Yeah? Who's actually seen it? Because I actually haven't. I've been meaning to for a long time. But to go over it quickly, the blob is an alien entity that crashes to Earth in a meteor into small-town USA. And at first it just looks like this innocuous bit of jelly, this bit of red goo. But a townsfolk person comes, finds it, pokes it with a stick, and it jumps onto him and globs onto him and starts to consume him. It grabs onto his hand and it envelops him, and he is all of a sudden no longer himself. He is consumed with this mass of the blob. There is no more distinctiveness that belongs to him. There is no identity that belongs to him. There is only blob. And if this sounds like anything that you might have seen before, it sounds to me a little bit like this. This is a formless mass without structure, without any sort of beauty or feeling or semantics to it. This your body field is a blob. Your body field is a movie monster. There are ways to avoid the blob problem in Drupal. There are fields along with template files, so you can theme your fields to get your fields into semantic bits called chunks instead that you can work with on an individual basis. There's a module called Display Suite that's used in Drupal 7 and in Drupal 8 to help you get a little more comfortable with altering how your fields look and how they function. And there's also a widely used module called Panels, which you can use with or without fields. But Panels is another very, very complex solution for getting complicated layouts and getting your content into meaningful places in those areas. But each of these solutions has its own problems. For example,
yeah. So if we look at fields and template files, this is like if you're not doing anything, no custom or no modules to do it. This is what you get with Drupal core. You add fields in, you go into the theme, you add and edit template files, and you get a lot of control, which is really great. It's extremely flexible. But if something needs to change, you have to download the Git repository, you need to make the change, you need to test it to make sure this template file is specific enough for this use case and doesn't break something on some other page that you have. So it becomes really, really difficult to change, especially if the person does not know or use code. And that's a really big problem. Likewise, the Display Suite module. I still use and love the Display Suite module, but it takes some of those things that you would do with just a template file and moves them into the UI, so you can have layouts, you can kind of arrange fields within different layouts, and have a little bit more particularity about where things should go, which is really great. And the templates are reusable, which is really cool. And you don't really need custom code, but you can do reusable templates and things like that. You kind of have to know a little bit of code to get full control over the displays.
There's also the Panels module, like I said before. So Panels gives you the ability to define different layouts for all of your pages in the user interface. And within those layouts will be different regions, and you can put various chunks of content into those regions. And this is a very popular solution that's still used widely today. One of the problems with it is that it has a bunch of configuration in the interface. It is extremely confusing as a beast to try to get your hands into it. It's a little clunky, and it can be easy to break if you don't understand exactly what you're doing with configurations. It doesn't look like anything that comes out of the Drupal interface. It looks like something different, some other monster that came out of the depths. Not a blob, but some other movie monster that perhaps somebody will put a question and tell me
like
what it.
Swamp Thing or something.
Swamp Thing is a good possibility. Yeah, it's a bit of a Swamp Thing of configuration, is what I'm trying to tell you.
Or Kraken, maybe.
A Kraken?
Yeah, we should we'll do a BOF after we can talk about the movie monster that relates to Panels.
Please do. Come tell us about the movie monster that we should be referencing here in this slide. It's complicated to learn. There are a lot of moving pieces there, and you can very easily do it wrong and not realize why.
And then so these are all solutions. These work, but I've never really found that these have been great solutions. Like they kind of get you there, but it's missing something, and that's where the paragraphs module comes in. That's why we're here today, to talk about paragraphs. So when I was thinking about the definition of the paragraphs, how it thinks about paragraphs, I defined it like this. It lets site builders weave together beautiful pages using clean, ordered, XML-friendly content. And the beautiful part, I think, the fact that you can output a page that has a mix of the image and a video and text between it and 2 columns, and you can just kind of build a page that is relatively complex without having to know code is a really beautiful thing. You end up with this really beautiful page that would otherwise be really difficult to make with just code. And also, it's XML friendly, which means it's good for computers. So if you need to output, let's say an image that's on a node. It's in a field. It's not embedded in the WYSIWYG. It's not, in a big blob that you have to parse or, figure out with conflict. Yeah, it's just really tricky. So XML means that computers can access all the content that's on your website, not just the blob.
Let's try to illustrate exactly what we mean here. Let's say, for example, first of all, the paragraphs module, as we use it, David and I, colloquially, right now, we use it to replace the body field. So whereas when you install a content type, you automatically get a body field created for it, what we will typically do for a lot of content types is just throw away the body field and then replace it with a paragraphs field instead. Let's take a look at what that might look like. Let's say for a minute that this is the node, as you might see it, a representation of the node as it's displayed on your site. It's got the title at the top of the node. I might add an image field to it, so I've got like one main image that displays at the very top of my node, and then underneath it I've got my body field, and it's got a mixture of text, of headers, of markup, of images, all the things that I might want to throw into my CK editor WYSIWYG widget. We want to get rid of that. We're just going to throw that out, and instead we get a paragraphs field. That paragraphs field can contain any number of individual structured paragraphs, which can then be mixed and matched and reordered or destroyed individually and recreated. So the benefits of that is that you can create many different types of paragraphs. You may have need for paragraphs of text, but you might also need to have a paragraph type that displays an image, or a paragraph type that displays a map, for example. Each paragraph type that you set up, similar to like content types, each of those types of paragraphs can have their own set of fields on it. And any fields that you can get in the Drupal ecosystem, any fields that are provided by core, or fields that you can get by downloading contributed modules, those work out of the box with the paragraph system because it reuses the same concepts that already are familiar within Drupal. So some examples of paragraph types that you might create in order to replace your body field would be things like you might want a text field. So this would be a plain text field, or maybe even a text field with a very, very simple WYSIWYG implementation, so you can maybe bold things or italicize things. You would want maybe something like a poll quote, which is another bit of text, but you want it styled so that it's maybe bigger and italicized. Maybe it's got quote marks on either side visually to sort of indicate that it's something that that somebody is saying, or something that is worthy of emphasis. You could have an image paragraph, so that I want to be able to put an image on the page that comes with a caption and maybe a different field for the source, and I want to be able to put the image anywhere on the page that I like, anywhere within the flow of the body. Similarly, I might have a video field, or a video paragraph. So a paragraph type that contains a video embed field or some sort of media field that allows me to paste in the URL from YouTube and have it display on my page as a video, and then maybe also with a caption underneath that as well. These kinds of paragraphs, I kind of like to lump into a category called content paragraphs, which is, it's not a thing that comes from paragraph modules, it's just a useful way of thinking about this kind of paragraph to organize it in my own head. And these content paragraphs, to me, are distinct from another type of paragraphs, which might include things like an aside, something that is meant to be displayed over, like a sidebar in a magazine, something that is over to the side of my body. Or, for example, an accordion, which starts off as just a header text, but when you click it, it expands and reveals other content inside of it as well. Similarly, there might be the need for a paragraph type that is 2 columns. So I can put a paragraph on the page that gives me a left column and a right column, which might sound familiar if you were paying attention to our example earlier. These kinds of paragraphs, as opposed to content paragraphs, we like to think of them as layout paragraphs. They contain sort of structure that allows us to think about the way things are displayed relative to each other on the page. There's a third kind of paragraph type as well, which the example that we have listed here is called a pony. And
What's a pony?
So that's a good question. A pony is a small horse. It is a special thing. I have a pony in my site, and I care for my pony. I love my pony, but my pony is not your pony. You won't want to use my pony for anything. It's your pony, and I don't care about your pony. I only care about my pony. The pony in this example is something that is special and unique to your site. it maybe is a hybrid of a layout paragraph and a content paragraph. Or maybe your pony is some visual curlicue that you want to be able to drop into the body that is purely presentational, but otherwise serves no content purpose. I don't know what your pony could be, but I wanted to mention it here because these special cases can sometimes be useful in one-off situations as well as a type of paragraph that you might want to intersperse into your body. So how do we use these different paragraph types in place of our body? Let's look at our example again of our node as it exists currently with a body field. We don't want that, we know, so we're just going to swipe that away. And instead, we're going to replace that body field with an array of paragraphs that we've defined. So first I might want a little bit of a text paragraph, and then I might have a little bit of a pull quote underneath it to emphasize some key point, and then a little bit more text. And then underneath it, I want to put something into two columns, so I have a two-paragraph column down there. The nice thing about paragraphs is because we've put that what used to be a blob of content into structure, I can manipulate that structure and move it around and rearrange it. So let's say I don't actually like where that pull quote is. I want that to be lower on the page. I can swap out. Oh, I'm sorry. That's not the thing I was talking about. The image field, for example, I used to have an image field, and that would always display an image at the very top of the page. Let's say I didn't want that. I can replace the image field with an image paragraph instead. So now my body includes a paragraph of the image at the top of the page. I can move around paragraphs. They can be reordered. So we can swap the position of paragraphs. Can move the image down within the body content, so it doesn't have to be above the body anymore. It can be interspersed into the body if I like. Additionally, because paragraphs are semantic entities, by which I mean they're XML friendly, like David was talking about. They have HTML classes on them, and they have structure that allows us to write our CSS in an intentional way so that we can determine how that's going to look in, for instance, in mobile devices. If we imagine for a second that the rectangle on the left is my desktop display, and the rectangle on the right is my extremely long iPhone, I can think about how I would arrange the paragraphs on my page such that they would look differently on the desktop than they would on the mobile device. So as I add paragraphs, I can tell it with CSS rules that an aside shouldn't flow to the left on desktop, you'll see on the left, but it might go full screen instead. And the things that array to the right of that would just fall underneath it. I can write CSS rules that allow it to gracefully deal with those layout situations in an array of devices. This would be largely impossible in a WYSIWYG field because your WYSIWYG doesn't give you predictable structures to be able to arrange these things.
Or maybe you could do it for one page, and then you do it for one other page, and for one other page.
Ooh.
But if you want to do it for all of the pages, and like for every time you reuse these paragraph elements, then paragraphs lets you do that because, right? Because otherwise you're writing custom code. You could say, well, on this page I want it to be mobile friendly, and I want this aside to appear over here, and that one to go full screen. So you can do it with a body field if you add enough extra classes and stuff in there and divs. But paragraphs, like Les said, it gives you a predictable elements. So you know exactly every time that a side is being used, I want it to always go full screen. So you don't have to theme as much for special cases.
Exactly, and those semantic elements like HTML structure and HTML classes, they're not fragile. They're going to be there every time. With a body field, somebody was going to edit it and blow away all of the careful classes that you added into your divs and your H5s and your H4s, and you won't know why suddenly your layout's broken, but it's because somebody didn't realize that when they were editing the page, they would clear out your classes.
Sounds like you've been through that before.
I've been through that maybe before a couple times. One interesting additional thing that makes paragraphs sing for me is that you can have paragraphs that exist inside of other paragraphs. So let's think about our example right here. I've got an aside paragraph, which we've called a layout type of paragraph, over on the left side of the page. And when I start out with paragraphs module, I might think my aside is just sort of like, it contains a text field, so I can put just my text that's going to go in the aside. But because we can think of paragraphs as being nested inside of other paragraphs, I'm not limited to only putting text in my aside. I could put other paragraphs in there so that instead of text, I might have a paragraph of text, but then I might also have an image. And then I might have a pull quote under that instead. In my 2-column layout paragraph that's under there, that could just be text, but it could also contain paragraphs. I might decide that what I need instead is I need an image and a bit of text underneath each of those columns. And again, because we're using the paragraph system, each of those can be reordered as you please within the layout that you've chosen. So layout paragraphs can contain other content paragraphs as well. One of the caveats that we should mention here for nesting is that you probably want to limit the amount of nesting you do because that can get very confusing very fast if you have 4 or 5 different levels of paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs. The inception of paragraphs, you're going to fall into limbo eventually. So one rule that I like to follow is I like to only, if I'm nesting paragraphs, I'm only putting things that are content paragraphs into things that are layout paragraphs. I don't ever make it possible to put things that are layout paragraphs inside of other layout paragraphs because in some ways it doesn't make sense. You wouldn't necessarily need an aside to be contained in another aside, right? So having that kind of semantic rule in your head kind of gets you out of some trouble going forward as you plan out your paragraph strategy.
But if you like trouble, then sure, go for it.
Sometimes I like trouble.
Yeah.
I can be a Drupal bad boy.
So if we look back at our scenario, the one we're trying to recreate, let's jump into a practical example. How would we do something like this with the paragraphs module? So we took some screenshots. We don't want to do the whole live demo thing, so we took some screenshots, and here's what our environment was set up with. We added Drupal 8. You get a similar sort of experience with Drupal 7, so if you're not quite up to Drupal 8 yet, the same pattern should be relevant for you. We added and enabled only the 2 modules you see here, paragraphs and entity reference revisions, and that's all we did, so starting fresh. So the first thing we want to do is go into the paragraph types section, kind of like content types. In Drupal 8, well, in Drupal 7 too, paragraphs are entities. And so the interface looks a little bit similar to what you'd expect from a content type. And the process to add fields to it also looks very similar to adding a content type. So we visit the page. We don't currently have any paragraph types, so we want to add a new one. So we'll click to add a new one. This one's just the text. We're going to start just by adding a few content paragraph types, so we have some stuff to work with. So we added a paragraph type called text. And then if we go over to operations here, we can go to manage fields and start adding a field. In this case, it would just be a text field, maybe a text area with some WYSIWYG if you'd like. Yep, pretty straightforward stuff. And so we would call it text for this new field. And so just to jump ahead, so we've created a text field. We also went ahead and created a pull quote, which might also include a text field. But in the theme, maybe that's where we add the additional styles to make a pull quote a little more unique. And then we add an image paragraph type too, that just has an image field on it. Okay, so that's great for the content paragraph types, but in order to get that 2-column layout with the paragraphs, we need to add another paragraph type that we're calling columns 2. In this case, we're going for a very simple example, so we're defining it as just being a simple 2-column layout. It is possible for you to say, unlimited columns. I can do as many columns as I want. But then you have more to account for in the theme, and it gets a little more complicated.
Columns everywhere.
I know. So we just did 2 columns in this case. And for this one, just like any content type, you go to manage fields, there's nothing there. We're actually going to add 2 paragraph fields now to this field. So this is a case where we're nesting. We want people to add any of the other paragraphs, any of the other content paragraphs into our columns. So we can say, in the right column we want the image at the top and the text. In the other column we want image at the top and text. If we always want it to be that way, we could also just add the fields, image and text into our 2-column layout. But in this case, we want to be flexible. We don't know what the end user is going to want to put into a column, so we simply add some paragraph fields. So we go to add field. We're going to choose paragraph, but in this case, we want to make sure we choose the one under reference revisions, and that's with the entity reference revisions module right?
Yes, in Drupal 8.
In Drupal 8 is given to you so that it is aware of revisions, and you can save the paragraphs that you have here within the revision system in Drupal, which is pretty cool. So we add one. We're going to add a paragraph field for first column, and we go through the process. We click Save and Continue. And then on the field configuration page, we're able to say which paragraphs we want to include within our 2-column left field paragraph type. So in this case, we're following less best practices and not including the 2-column layout within our 2-column layout, because that gets really confusing. So we're just adding our content paragraph types here, so the image, the pull quote, and the text. And we'll click Save Settings, and I think we jump ahead. We've created the second column as well, so we have 1 and 2. They're both referencing paragraph types. And once we have this set up, we have our 3 content paragraph types. We have 1 layout paragraph type. We can start adding these to our content type. So we, in this case, move on from the paragraph type section, and we go to our basic page. Again, the interface in Drupal 8 is very consistent across the board with all of the entity types, so it looks like we're back, it looks like exactly the same thing from one to the other. But we're actually on the basic page content type at this point. We don't want the body field. We're actually going to get rid of the body field and just add our paragraph field to it. So we'll delete the body field. We'll add a new paragraph field. And in this case, maybe we're being a little bit too specific, but we know in this case we just want a 2-column layout, so we're only selecting that as the only option for people to choose from. If you wanted more flexibility, if you wanted people to be able to choose any sort of paragraph type, you would just select those on the paragraph field itself. So we'll click Save. We will now just go to our basic page. We're going to add a new piece of content to our basic page. And this is what this is what we have to look at here. We don't have a body field because we removed that. We just have this add 2 columns, or add columns to section there. If we had additional paragraph types to select from, those would be in a drop button to choose from there. Or we can specify in the settings that they should have a unique, its own a distinct button, so that you can click between those. So let's click that. Let's click Add Columns To. And we get here, we knew that there were going to be 2. There's 2, one for the first column and one for the second column. And these are both paragraph fields, so we have that drop button I was mentioning. And we can then choose, we want an image and a text field. So we'll click that, we'll click the drop button, we'll say image or text. And then this is what it could look like. Maybe we add the first image for the Drupal icon. Again, we're trying to recreate that scenario that we were looking at. And then we add some lore mix and text here. I felt a little bad putting the header within here. Like you could probably have a separate text field for headings to distinguish them, give you a little bit more abstraction. But again, for the case of having a simple example, we just added that within the
I feel fine.
Yeah?
Yeah.
I think it's okay in some cases, but
You'll see, it's a WYSIWYG. You actually have a WYSIWYG embedded in here, and I'd like to say, I have nothing against WYSIWYGs. WYSIWYGs are wonderful, but you'll notice that in this example, there are very few options in the WYSIWYG. And in Drupal, you can configure your WYSIWYG to have a minimal number of options. So here, it makes sense for you to be able to bold or italicize your text or add links or list items. Probably not image so much in there, but everything else, that seems perfectly reasonable to have in a WYSIWYG.
So we added our content, we click Save, and this is what we get. Okay, so this isn't quite what we're looking for, right? To be looking at our example we saw earlier, this is not quite right. First of all, where is all that extra text? Where is the first column image? Where is the columns to? Where is the text? Where are those all coming from? Well, in Drupal, if you've been building websites with Drupal for a little while, and you've been adding fields to content types, you've probably seen this over and over and over again, where you add a new field to a content type, you add content, and then all the fields have labels. And in most cases, in many cases, you don't actually want to see the labels. So in this case, because we're working with the content type, with the basic page, we have one field on there for the 2-column layout. That's where that columns to is coming from. And then for first column and second column, That's actually coming from the 2-column layout, so it's an entity, so we have to go remove the labels from there. And then there's a third layer here, because we have an image paragraph type and a text paragraph type. So we basically have to go through all of our types, kind of like you would do all of your content types, and choose how they should be displayed in this situation. Should they have a label? Should it be floated left or right? Should it be bold or, I'm sorry, not bold. How do you want to render the image? Should it be rendered with a color box or just a normal image? And so I went through, I cleaned it up, I removed all of the labels because we don't care about those. And it looks a little bit better. It's not quite looking how we expect it to yet, and that's because we haven't done any theming yet. So in this case, we're creating a new layout that we defined in the paragraph type. We do have to do a little bit of code, but it's very simple, it's very predictable. You can just go to one and you can say float left 50%, float right 50%. Again, this is a simple example. I wouldn't necessarily do it like this. But with just a little bit of CSS, across the board on all of your pages, whenever you use a 2-column layout, it's now going to be predictable and working properly. And we get something that's very close to what we're expecting. So the experience for us required this teensy bit of theming code that you have to do, but the experience for the end user, the person who's actually adding the content, they don't have to know any code or know that it required a custom anything. They just go through and select from their button, I want a 2-column layout, I want to add this content within the column layout. They click save, and it happens.
And we kept them on their regular edit form, the same edit form that they get when they edit any page.
That's right. So really, I think this gives you a great amount of flexibility because of how the features that paragraphs give us access to.
Yeah, but it's also not particularly complex, right? You can build out sort of generic paragraph types without necessarily thinking about how they're going to be used. As long as you have good rules about how you're displaying those things, then you allow your users, your end users, your editors, to be able to craft their own pages according to whatever vision they have without exposing any additional complexity to them. To come up with the strategy that you have for which paragraph types you're going to create and which layouts you're going to make available to it, there are a couple of things that you have to keep in mind. One is that you are very often going to come up with some sort of design or wireframe that gives you an example of what a page layout needs to look like, and maybe it'll come with a bit of placeholder layout. You need to try to look beyond what you see on the designs and think more abstractly about ways to compose a page that you may not even be thinking about right now, but that maybe somebody would want to make available down the future. Get out of the headspace of the immediate design and think about just how your components should look by themselves, how they should look if they are nested inside of an aside or if they are nested inside of a 2-column paragraph. If you think about them in generics like that, you will eventually be able to get something where everything looks good regardless of what the actual content is or which layouts are being used and where they've been put on a page. So along with that, you try to make the solutions as reusable as possible. So instead of several different pony paragraph types, try to see if you can come up with a solution where you don't need ponies anymore, because you can do that with a text paragraph combined with a pull quote paragraph underneath it and an image paragraph underneath that, right? Because in different configurations, you can maybe do exactly what you need to do without having to create your special cases.
Or with view modes.
Or with view modes, which we'll go over in a sec.
Yeah. We only talked about the core paragraphs module, but there are a number of contrib modules that are available for Drupal 7 and Drupal 8 that extend the experience in paragraphs. So I particularly like the paragraph ID and classy paragraphs module. The great thing about the paragraph ID is that it makes each paragraph has its own classes that's unique, so that you can style each paragraph individually if you want to, which is super helpful. The classy paragraphs actually lets you create a preset list of classes that you can then make available on the edit form, so that people can say, let's say the pull quote. Maybe you want it to be a call to action pull quote in bold instead of italics. You can create 2 classes that are options when people add a pull quote and say, should this be the bold version, or should this be the yellow version? Should this be the one with our logo or the one with whatever? And then depending on which one they choose, it'll actually add the class that they define from the list onto the paragraph, which then you can, in the theme, use that class to make, again, consistent theming whenever it's being used.
And as I mentioned before, since paragraphs uses the core Drupal entity system that's meant to work with fields, any field module that you could find throughout the Drupal ecosystem on Drupal.org or elsewhere, it should work beautifully with paragraphs. For instance, you might in Drupal 7 need to download the view field module, which is a handy module that allows you to select any view that you've configured. I don't know if you went to David's session yesterday on views. You can configure a view that's meant to be embedded into a paragraph and displayed anywhere in your body that you like. By adding a view paragraph that has a view field inside of it. Similarly, there's no field module in Drupal core and Drupal 7 and Drupal 8 for displaying a video nicely by just pasting in a URL. There are several modules in the contributed module space that do this for you. The video module is one. There's one called Video Embed Field that's available for Drupal 7. There's also the media module ecosystem that allows you to do some of the same things. But because they're all field modules, they will all work the way you expect them to work with paragraphs as well. And then there's view mode selector. This is a favorite one for both David and I, actually. So the view mode selector allows you to define different ways that your paragraphs can be displayed, and it allows you to put a field on each paragraph, a drop-down field where you can select a style for that thing.
Taking a step back, if you're not familiar with the term view mode, basically Drupal out of the box has a view mode for full. So like if you're viewing an article, what happens when you view the full article node? And then teaser or summary, what happens when you're just viewing it in a shortened version? Do you want to see the featured image on one version or the other? Drupal lets you actually drag and drop the fields around and choose. Maybe you don't want to see all the fields or the full body text on the teaser, but you do want to see them all on the full mode. What Drupal also lets you do now is actually create as many view modes as you want. So you can create view modes. There's several ways to create view modes, I guess. You can do it in custom code, or you can use it through Display Suite, or what was the other module?
Entity view mode in Drupal 7.
Yep. So you can create view modes, as many as you want, and then it lets you have pretty good detailed control, especially if you add in Display Suite on top of that, to choose how things are displayed. And then the great thing about this module is that it lets you choose when you're editing or adding the paragraph to say which view mode do we want to see.
Right. So for example, you could have an aside paragraph, and you don't always want it to display on the left side of your desktop page. Sometimes you want it to go to the right. You could add view modes for left aligned and right aligned, and add a view mode selector field to the aside paragraph type, which allows you to choose between left aligned or right aligned. And then when you theme your aside paragraph type, you can tell it to add the CSS for aligning it to the left if it's chosen for left aligned, or if you've chosen with your view mode field that it's supposed to be right aligned, then you can write the CSS for that as well.
Yeah, and so the classy paragraphs would let you do something like that too.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. So I really like the field groups module also. The field groups module lets you group fields together and then do things like, say you have a group of fields. I really like them because when you're nesting fields, they get really, you see this field and then within it you see another one indented, within that another one indented. And if you have a lot of text or a lot of fields within there, it can get really long, so the page becomes just super long and complicated. The great thing about the field groups module is it will let you condense those and say maybe this entire group of fields is a field set that's closed by default. If someone comes to a page that's really long and they click edit, instead of seeing just rows and like lots and lots and lots of content, they see, okay, where's the section I'm looking to edit? Okay, here's the first column on that 2-column layout. Click it, it expands so you can see all the fields that's in there. It just keeps it really nice and tidy for the editor experience.
Yeah, I like to use it sort of similar to that as well. One thing that we like to do is we'll use field groups to put everything else into one vertical tab. So Drupal has the vertical tab interface where you click on a tab on the left and it brings you just the fields that are associated with that tab open in the sort of the main editing area. and you can go through the list of vertical tabs and see other vertical tab lists. Field group allows you to plug into that system and create your own vertical tabs and put your fields into those things. So what we might do is, for instance, put title and teaser fields onto one vertical tab, and then we'll have a second vertical tab that's called paragraphs, and the only thing that's in that vertical tab is our paragraphs field, so we can just see what will be our body field in the edit form on its own without confusing it with other fields that we might have alongside of it. So another pro tip that that has been useful for me is that if you've been theming in Drupal for a long time, or if even for a short time, one of the things that you might have noticed is that your templates can get huge awfully fast. It's a problem often referred to as div-itis. So many div HTML tags and so much nesting of HTML content that it quickly becomes overwhelming. You can simplify some of that content out, or some of that structure out, very easily by editing the template file that corresponds to your basic paragraphs field. In Drupal 8, that file is called field paragraphs.html.twig, by the way. In Drupal 7, it would be .tpl.php instead, but this would be a file that you would copy from the paragraphs module out into your theme. And to illustrate why that's helpful, like here is typically a representation of what your markup might look like from our two-column example from before, for example. So we've got our node type page container at the very top. And then in it, we've got a field for our paragraphs. And then inside of that is a container for all of the paragraph items. And then inside of that is each paragraph item gets its own div. And then we finally get down to our layout paragraph. Paragraph type columns 2. So this is the layout paragraph. Inside of that is a field for the first column, which is a paragraph field. That also has a field set for field items, which contain all of the items of the field, which include, for example, now our content paragraphs. Paragraph type image and paragraph type text. Each of those also has their own fields. This gets exhausting awfully quickly. What we would like to do, and what we can do very easily by getting rid of some of the extra field logic in that template, is to identify some fields that are maybe extraneous to us. We don't really, most of the time, need wrappers for all of the individual instances of fields. We don't even need wrappers for those fields themselves. We can just, in most cases, we're fine just allowing it to say that we've got a field that contains a layout paragraph. That layout paragraph contains an image paragraph and a text paragraph, or whatever there happens to be. If we can get rid of just these two pieces of code in that template, then that structure condenses down very nicely to something that looks like this instead. And I'd much rather deal with this, just coming from my standpoint. If you like this, by all means, don't touch it. That's totally fine. That's on you. That is on you.
And so you can definitely do this in the theme. You can do this by editing the twig file. You can also use, there's a couple modules that let you get rid of these extraneous wrapping divs on fields also.
Fences?
Fences, I think, is one.
I feel like that's right.
Something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think you can do something like that with Display Suite, too, with some of the supplementary modules and settings and the extras section. But yeah, you probably, you don't need those, most likely. And if you're a little overwhelmed by this example and looking at the code, like this is a little bit too much, if you're not familiar with Twig especially, just know that this is extra. This is not something you have to do to use the paragraphs module. It's just if this is the sort of thing that bugs you, you probably already know how to get in and make this change.
Right. So we're nearing the end here.
Should we take some questions real quick, though?
Before we talk about we'll get to this later. But let's look at what came up in our questions. Do you know how to use this?
I do. Yeah. Okay.
You know how to use computers?
I do.
Okay.
Okay. So we have a few suggestions for characters that are associated.
Can we get it up here? Or?
Yeah, I'll pop a few ones. None of them are voted on, so I can't say there's a best one. But John suggested aliens. For panels as a representation. There's also Godzilla, which would be good, yeah.
Also.
Yep. And then I think that's all the suggestions for that, and we actually have serious questions now. So let's jump into some of those.
Okay.
What are some of the best methods for migrating content from the body field, blob, into a paragraph field?
We actually talked about this a little bit. We had a birds of a feather session before lunch where this came up. This can be a difficult one. What we'd come up with is there is a module in the Drupal ecosystem called migrate. It's also migrate is something that's part of Drupal 8 core, and as part of the migrate module, you can bring in content from one source into your Drupal site and run some transformations on it to make sure that everything goes to the right place. I have not particularly had a lot of luck into migrating content directly into a paragraph type, but what I have done is migrated like WYSIWYG body content from like a WordPress source or a Joomla source into like a temporary field that I've set up for my page that's just for containing that old WYSIWYG body text, and then run some code that creates a text paragraph and just copies the content into the text paragraph. For really bad body content, sometimes that's all you can do. It's not usually on you as the developer to try to fix somebody else's blob, because it's very hard to do that with code. That's something that's a content manager or a content editor's prerogative, really. So sometimes the best we can do is at least put it into the paragraphs interface in a way that they can get at it. And that might be just creating a text paragraph and then having what used to be their WYSIWYG blob, just paste it in there so it is there and available to be edited. But the nice thing about that is, at that point, is that somebody who is editing that content later on can just go through the list and maybe get rid of an image that was in the WYSIWYG content and then add in a new image paragraph underneath it and paste in what used to be that image directly in there, and they can sort of recreate their content a little easier because their old markup is now in the new system at the very least.
Yeah, so unfortunately there isn't a great solution.
Yeah, that's a long way of saying,
Another great question. It seems possible that some unexpected permutation of nested layouts could still occur that you didn't style for. Is there a method to limit the possible layouts a contributor or a content author can produce? Yes. So we mentioned, you can certainly limit to say within a layout you can't choose other layouts. For each paragraph field, you're able to say which paragraph fields you're able to put within it, or paragraph types you're able to put within it. So you can restrict it not on a per person basis, but on a per field basis. How deep you want to allow that to go.
Right. You can also you can define multiple different paragraph fields that have different sets of paragraphs that you want to add in. So let's say you have a page content type, like a basic page content type, and like a landing page content type. So like your landing page content type might be for your front page specifically, or for very, very important pages in your navigation, whereas basic page might be like where you would create something like blog content or news content or something like that. Terrible example, but
About us.
About us page, yeah. Something that is not like a landing page. You don't want it to be styled exactly like that. But so the idea is that you can create a paragraphs field for your landing pages that contains a different set of layout paragraphs or content paragraphs or paragraphs that are styled differently from the paragraphs field that you would include on just basic pages, for example. I don't know if that quite answers the question that you had. I mean, by the way, also, if you'd like a follow-up on that, please feel free to raise your hand in case we're not explaining it, satisfactorily as well. I see the question and answer sort of going, So if you want to talk to us, by all means, either come up or raise your hand and we'll talk. But otherwise.
Okay, next question. It seems to me that throwing out the body area is not good for accessibility in screen readers. Please comment. I think it actually should be better because you're presenting structured content instead of a blob. So screen readers should do an even better job of identifying the different parts of the content you're looking at.
I agree. There is nothing special about a Drupal body field that makes it inherently accessible. In fact, because of its lack of structure, it actually provides no clues about what is going on there. Whereas with a paragraphs field, you can give it semantic meaning and anything that you might be able to do to add accessibility add various accessibility features in for the body field would certainly apply also to a paragraphs field.
Especially if the module that or the field module that you're adding into the paragraph allows for additional formatting or ARIA or whatever, like like an address or a phone number or something like that. The field module for that particular field will add even more context and information there that just putting it into the area the body wouldn't do for you.
That's a great example. So if you had a map paragraph type, for example, the fields where you put in an address for that, Drupal might allow for that to have proper RDF comments on it, or proper Google schema.org specifications that are associated with it, which you wouldn't be able to do very easily with a body field.
Next question. Is there a more WYSIWYG way of adding, selecting, or paragraph types while creating a new page? There is the preview mode, right?
Yes, we should talk about the preview mode specifically.
I've never used it though.
You've never used it?
No.
So the preview mode is how do I explain this? We should really have a slide in there for this. We should put that in a to-do. But the preview mode of paragraphs lets you define a view mode again. So we talked about view modes. A view mode that is a representation of your paragraph, but only for the edit page, so that instead of your full image on that you want to display on your page being displayed in your edit form and taking up 800 or 1,000 pixels, maybe in the preview mode you're only displaying it as a thumbnail and you're displaying the caption alongside of it, or perhaps in the preview mode you're only displaying the first paragraph of the text that you added into that paragraph, not the full thing. So when you are editing to the page at first, you aren't overwhelmed with a bunch of fields. You only have the previews of each of the paragraphs, and then you can choose individually whether or not you want to edit an individual paragraph and see the full field set or not. I don't know if that's a satisfactory answer to that question. It's not very WYSIWYG-like, I guess, at that point, but yeah.
I was more concerned about when you're doing multiple columns. Some people are better at visualizing what that will look like.
Oh, I think I see a little bit what you mean.
So is there a way that when you select two columns, then you can drag in the paragraph types you want? Or?
Certainly, I think if you did if you customized the admin theme, I think you'd be able to say when this one is in the admin. When you have two columns, actually show them side by side, and then as you add stuff, it'll look like that.
That's a customization. There's no sub module or anything.
Not so far.
Not as far. And again, so layouts like that, they're not something that are built into paragraphs. They're a conceit that you are putting on top of a paragraph. Just because I called a paragraph two columns doesn't mean paragraph has any idea what that means. I add the two column style using CSS on the front end. And so if I want to do that on the back end as well, I can certainly do that, but it would be a separate thing to do.
All right, next question. Since the default body field also contains summary field automatically, how do you suggest replacing the functionality when using paragraph fields? This is a great question. We talked a little bit about this during the BOF as well, and I loved your answer, so I'll let you answer it.
So I guess my answer is that I almost always want my content editors to intentionally thinking about what a summary should be as opposed to the body field. I think the summary that comes included with the body field, it's very tempting to just leave it alone because Drupal will go ahead and create a summary for you, and it'll take your body field and it'll take the first 200 characters of it, and that's your summary, and that is a terrible summary of your body. As much as possible, you should encourage your editors to think about the summary as being something separate that is descriptive in a different way than the body. And so I would actually encourage you to have a separate plain text field or markup text field that is just for the teaser or the summary when you happen to need that instead. So you still have your paragraphs field, but then you also have a teaser field as well that's totally separate from your paragraphs implementation. And then you use view modes to decide that when you're viewing the node as a teaser, you use the summary field instead of the paragraphs field or whatever.
When I first started doing it this way, I expected a little bit of pushback from the client, but I think it actually made a little more sense that there was a separate teaser instead of having to explain, it just automatically takes the first however many characters, and you put an image at the top of the WYSIWYG, and that complicates it. Just having a separate field that's just plain text or whatnot, just I think made a lot more sense.
Yeah.
Can paragraphs enforce a nesting limit?
The paragraphs module itself can't do that, but you certainly can. I mean, you as the site builder can say that I'm not putting any more paragraphs fields anywhere where they can accidentally keep on creating more and more paragraphs. So that's sort of why the general rule of only putting content paragraphs inside layout paragraphs becomes useful, because you can just make a rule for yourself that your content paragraphs do not contain any other fields that are nestable. So you won't be able to go further than 2 levels in, for example.
Yes.
Can you limit, so let's say you have paragraphs, 2 columns, the layout setup. Can you limit that so a user can only do like 3 2 columns?
Sure.
Like I can only, like on my page, I can have a maximum of 3 2-column paragraphs and then stop.
Probably not.
Well,
There's-
it's always like unlimited. You can add as many 2 columns as your heart desires.
That's the way that paragraphs wants to work. It doesn't have any knowledge of enforcements like that.
Okay.
You can certainly do that with form API logic, but I don't know of any module that just sort of does that. You could probably make a generic module that would enforce those kind of restrictions, and I'm sure the community would love to have it. But that's maybe not the most satisfactory answer. Paragraphs doesn't want to limit you. It wants to open up the flexible options that you need. So.
Les, do you have any recommendations or guidelines for when paragraphs should not be used?
When paragraphs should not be, so it's like when you should use when you should stay with a body field as opposed to a paragraphs field. It is a good question, and I think you were talking about this earlier in the
A little bit, yeah. So I've when I first heard about paragraphs and I was kind of brainstorming with lots of stuff, I got super excited, and I was building out a new site, and I just got rid of all the body fields and I replaced them with paragraph fields. And I found that it was a little bit overkill. You know, on pages where you really don't need any type of, any paragraph type, and you don't need any layouts or anything like that. If you really just need sort of a short description, let's say you have an event where all you need is just a really short description of the event and a date, and that's kind of it. It would be super overkill to add a paragraphs field, I believe. So you don't need it for every content type, but for many. And then as for cases where maybe it would not be a good idea, I'm not sure. You have more experience with it than I do.
So I always think about paragraphs as being a replacement for the body field, and I haven't found another use for the paragraphs module that does not include being not the body field, being something other than the body field. So we were talking a little bit about this earlier too, but I don't believe in something called the body field. When I hear when I look at something and it says body field, to me what I just see there is I see blob field, because body is a meaningless concept for your page. It just means not the title as far as I'm concerned. If in your event example that you just need a short little description for your event, then maybe what you are really looking for is a field called description or a field called event description, which makes more sense as you're thinking about what that content is. But it's also specifically not just a blob of whatever content happens to be there. So yeah, I think that there's no time at which it makes sense to stay with a body field that's called body specifically.
Cool. Let's see, we have time for 2 more questions. Let's see. I've already answered that one and that one too. Okay. Well, there was a question about what was the interface? Where do we actually just delete the labels?
Oh, yeah.
And the answer is really just on the manage display for each paragraph type and for the content type. So if you have any specific questions, if you're not sure, feel free to come on up after, and I can answer that for you. Another quick one I think is in the CSS that we added to style that. Where did we put it? And the answer is in the theme that we're creating. So in Drupal 7, it would be right at the Drupal root in the themes directory, whatever your theme is.
It would be cites all themes probably in Drupal 7, right?
In
Because
Drupal 7, it would
yeah.
be cites all themes. In
Yeah.
Drupal 8, it would just be right at the Drupal root in the themes directory.
That's right,
And
yeah.
the theme that you're looking to do. And then that would vary from theme to theme on the exact structure, but that's where you put it. Yeah.
I had a question and a comment. One, as far as like limiting the amount of paragraphs, when you set up the paragraph field, just like when you set up an image field, you can set it to be unlimited, or you can set a number of iterations of those paragraphs you can create. So you can kind of lock it down paragraphs in doing it, but the field setting will allow you to.
Yeah, you can say that will allow you to say you can only put like 5 paragraphs in here, but it won't say I can't put 5 2-column layout paragraphs in there.
Exactly. Yeah. The question I have is, I've been working with the sort of multilingual capabilities in Drupal 8, and I ran into an instance with nested paragraphs. Not the nested paragraph would not take on the language setting that I was using. The parent paragraph handled it just fine, but the nested paragraph didn't. I'm just wondering if you've run into a situation like that at all.
I saw something in the issue queue about that, but I haven't had that case.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of insight for you there either about what might be going on behind the scenes, but again, the issue queue might give you a better idea.
I just couldn't determine if it was a paragraphs issue or if it was a reference revisions issue.
This is in Drupal 8 too, right?
Yeah.
I think this is a known issue in paragraphs. I was talking to one of the maintainers at DrupalCon about something similar, but I don't have an update for you.
So let's.
It's 2 o'clock.
Yes, let me real quick. We do have.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to switch back. Sprinting is happening tomorrow. It's really important that we note that sprinting is relevant for everyone, not just people who are coders or who are super experienced with Drupal. Specifically, people like Les and I are kind of broken in that we already see, we have the rose-colored glasses, we've drank the Kool-Aid, we see Drupal as this awesome, perfect tool for building websites, when in fact it's actually not so great sometimes. And in those cases, we really would love to hear from people who do not have that perspective, who have a fresh eyes and can see Drupal for what it really is, whatever that is. So whether or not you know code, it's okay. Documentation is super helpful. You coming and sharing your perspective is super helpful. Just kind of talking to people about what can be improved. There's usability stuff happening tomorrow too, I think they said.
There is. There's also a project called the Drupal 8 User Guide, which is supposed to be a self-guided tutorial to get you up to speed with what Drupal 8 is and how to get an example site set up. And all of the pages are written, but there's many of them need to be edited still. And so we've got a bunch of tasks open to get editors in to test those pages out and to look for any errors that might be there. That would be super helpful as well.
All right, thank you all for coming today.